Which Side Podcast is a proud member of the Which Side Media Collective.
This is episode 237.
Yeah, we talk with Midge Raymond.
Yeah, she's the author of My Last Continent and also a co-founder of Ashland Creek Press. Hey, and Midge, just to you personally, I just wanted to say sorry it took so long to get this one out there. We recorded it quite a while ago, and just sorry, but I hope you all enjoy.
Right now, while supplies last, we're offering the 2018 Certain Days Political Prisoner Calendar in every order over $20, as well as the Write Political Prisoners Tote Bundle, which is only $15. You get the tote and the calendar, and probably some more freebies like stickers and pins and patches. You'll see, we throw things in all the time. Only $15? Go to whichsidecollective.org.
We are at war!
The Soulcast is a twice-a-month anarchist podcast hosted by North American rap artist Soul. It's a podcast about revolutionary politics from an anarchist perspective. Every month I interview academics, journalists, revolutionaries, quote-unquote activists, artists, musicians, and really anything that I find interesting. I never got to go to college, so this, I guess, is my cheat sheet. So anybody who wants to learn, you can learn with me. Subscribe in iTunes at tinyurl.com/soulcast and check it out on the Channel Zero Podcast Network.
We are at war!
Which side? Which side? Which side are you on?
And now, here's Midge. How's your day going?
Fine. How about you guys?
Not too bad.
Yeah, pretty good so far.
It's perfect tea weather here right now. It's a little cloudy, a little bit of rain, and it's my favorite, you know. Anything to put on a cardigan and sip some tea, I'm totally down for.
I know, it's just, autumn just happened yesterday here in Southern Oregon. We've had incredible heat, we've had wildfires, it's been totally crazy, and then yesterday the weather turned cool, and it's like that crisp, beautiful autumn. It's tea weather, it's sweater weather, I love it.
How have the fires been for you? Because we've actually had a lot of the smoke from the fires up there coming down into Salt Lake.
Oh, that's on behalf of Oregon. I apologize. It's been terrible. It's been brutal. And I actually spent a lot of the summer in Southern California where my family lives and where I had a lot of book events and stuff like that. But it's been bad here all summer. And when we got back a couple weeks ago, it was very, very smoky. And then it cleared out for a week or so. But now we're getting some more smoke drifting through. So it's pretty bad out there. I'm hoping we're supposed to get some rain this week, so hopefully it'll take care of the fires, and hopefully we won't be blowing too much more smoke your way.
Yeah, I'm like, it sucks because I'm ultra sensitive to smoke. My voice isn't even back all the way because of it. And we sit in a valley, so as it blows in, it gets caught in the mountains and then just circulates here and just builds up slowly. So it doesn't like blow away very fast. It's pretty bad.
That's exactly what it's like here, because we're in a little valley as well, and you probably hear it in my voice too, and I'm not even usually that sensitive to it, so I know that the friends of mine who have asthma and who are sensitive, they're just having a terrible time. But yeah, it just settles in, and then it sits here, and if you don't get the wind or the rain, you just have to live with it. It's awful.
So let's just jump right into it. So what is your origins into activism in general, but then really what made you kind of steer towards literary activism?
Well, I've always been a writer, and I've always been a lover of animals. And it was not until I think it was actually when I took my first trip all the way down to the Southern Hemisphere to Antarctica. That was in 2004. So that was the very first time I really sort of made the connection between, animals, environment, and how I eat. And I never ate a lot of meat just because I never liked it. And I think a part of me probably never would have, except that, in my family, it was like, you eat what's put in front of you. And both my parents grew up with, without a lot. They always, we're just lucky to have food on the table, and so I was always just taught, I don't care if you don't like it, you eat it. So anyway, I never really gave vegetarianism and veganism a lot of thought until, it just sort of hit me being down in Antarctica, learning, falling in love with the penguins and learning how much humans are devastating their environment by fishing. And so I thought, okay, why am I eating fish? This is taking food right out of the mouths of the penguins. And even though I wasn't eating meat a lot of the time, I just decided, like, I'm done. I'm just, why am I even doing this? And once I did that, I began to think about eggs and dairy as well. And you guys know all this, but it was really the first time I made the connection about, just incredible cruelty, which I think the industries do an amazing job of hiding from people. And unless you know someone or are somehow fortunate enough to have a moment like I did where you recognize what's going on, you may not realize it. You don't know the damage you're doing, not only, to the animals, but to the environment. So that was a big wake-up call for me. And when I got back, I wrote a short story. I invented a character, put her in Antarctica, wrote a short story, and that appeared in my first book. And then the place stuck with me a lot, and the character stuck with me. And years later, I ended up writing My Last Continent. And, by then I was vegan. By then I wanted to make sure my character walked the walk in terms of, being a scientist and, being vegan, because that's the one thing I'm really, John and I both as co-founders of Ashland Creek Press are really passionate about. And it's a connection that so few environmentalists make, that you really can't, as you guys know, you can't be an environmentalist if you're not vegan. There's just no way. And yet I know of so many people who self-identify as environmentalists, and they still eat meat, they still eat dairy, and they're not making that connection yet. So one of the things that we want to do is make that connection through the books that we publish and through all the things that we write, because it's really that last connection that people need to make. And it's so important, because if everyone can do that, we can actually make a lot of change for good for this planet. Because animal agriculture is so environmentally destructive.
You said a couple things I want to get into, but first, like, you're down in Antarctica, and you said you had this connection of like, oh, I'm taking the fish away from these penguins. Like, what caused that connection for you? Was it just being there? Was there something specific that happened?
There was nothing specific that happened while I was there. It was more like when I came back and started to think about it. And, the way I process the world is through writing. And so it was probably even more when I began to work on that story. And John and I talked about it a lot as well. It was such a profound experience being in an environment that is still pristine, because so many places in the world are not, like just looking at the smoke. I mean, a lot of the smoke that we have in Oregon right now was caused by humans. It was caused by kids throwing firecrackers into a dead forest, a dry forest. And that experience of being down in a land in an area that was so untouched by humans. And that has changed a lot in the last 13 years or so, just because there are double the number of tourists that are going down there now than when we were there. But yeah, that had a profound effect on me. So it started making me think a lot about, how we affect the planet as humans in all kinds of different ways. And then the more I learned about penguins, because I was doing research for the book, and I started reading more about them, even before the trip as well as during, but especially after. Then I just realized that fishing, overfishing is one of the biggest challenges that these birds face, that all marine life faces. And so that just totally turned me off of eating anything that comes from the ocean. And I love talking about that when I do book events. And I always try to make sure I do, because a lot of people think, they read the book and they think, well, I probably shouldn't go to Antarctica because it's ruining the environment and it's damaging the penguins. And what I say is, I agree, maybe we have too many tourists going to Antarctica. But on the other hand, if you could go to Antarctica and experience what I did and come back and stop eating animals and stop eating fish, that'll do so much more for the planet than one trip to Antarctica, even though that is a big deal. And it may be better for us to stay away than to flock down there. But there are so many bigger problems penguins have than tourists. They have oil spills, they have overfishing, they have warming oceans. So I think that I always try to express like the thing that you can do to make the biggest difference for all animals is so easy, and it's a choice you can make 3 meals a day. You don't even have to get in a car, on a plane, or anything. It's really so simple. And I hope that a lot more people can start to realize that.
So before this, I didn't really even realize that tourism to Antarctica was a thing. What sort of things do people visit down there?
Well, tourism is a really interesting thing for Antarctica, and it's, for better or for worse, I mean, it's becoming popular in ways that I don't really like, such as, people think, oh, I want to run a marathon, in Antarctica. Like, there's a lot of like the thrill-seeking kind of stuff, which is needless to like fat biking is a thing, and all these sorts of things that I don't think should be done in Antarctica. You can fat bike anywhere. You don't have to go down, but a lot of people like to just have to be able to say they did it there. And so, but that kind of bugs me, because really what Antarctica is about is the wildlife and the fact that it is the most unique place on Earth, not only because it is the only place with no indigenous people, with no actual residents except for the scientists. It is also not really a country. It's governed by an international treaty that is based purely on peace and science and the sharing of information and getting along. And that is something that is so amazing and so incredible when you think about it, especially in this day and age, that there is a place in the world that is completely peaceful and where people coexist from, all nations, and it's really pretty spectacular. So I do think it's nice if people can experience that, and I think it gives you kind of a hope for what the world can be. It is really a very peaceful place, and I think it's important that people see the beauty of it and realize that whatever we do up here in the Northern Hemisphere directly affects what's going to happen down there. And if we don't treat our planet well, that Antarctica will cease to exist as we know it now. But what people do as tourists down there, to answer your question, is they go usually on small expedition boats. They float among the icebergs. They whale watch. They bird watch. And probably the coolest thing that you can do in Antarctica is to get in a little inflatable boat called a Zodiac and go on shore. And when people visit Antarctica, it's usually the Antarctic Peninsula, which is a stretch of islands on the northern part of the continent. And you can walk around among the penguin colonies, and you are required to stay away from wildlife. But if you sit down, the penguins will come right up to you. They don't have any predators on land, and they're super curious. And they'll just come up and start like pecking at your boots, or they'll just walk up to you and stare at you. They're very, very cool. And it's really, the other spectacular thing about it is it's a place where there's no human noise, and that's really hard to find. You don't hear cars in the distance. You don't hear planes going overhead. You hear nothing but wind and the splash of the waves and the birds and the penguins. It's pretty spectacular.
I've also heard the lack of light pollution at night is phenomenal.
The
lack of light pollution at night.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Now, when I went there, it was summer in Antarctica. It was January up here, and it was, which is their summer. And so it was light all the time. So most tourists go during that time of year when the sun actually doesn't really set. So you don't get to see the stars or the aurora. But those who overwinter there, which is mostly researchers, and there are a few artists. There's an artist program for people to go down there, as either a painter or a writer. But yeah, when you overwinter there, it is incredible what you can see in the sky. Because you're right, there's nothing there. It's amazing.
So what is the importance of activists, engaging in these works of fiction, both consuming and creating?
Well, I think that all activism is incredibly important, and because it's just going to take so much work to get to where we need to be. And I think the thing about literary activism that's important is that you can reach so many people who may be, not paying attention, or maybe, they don't read activist magazines, or they don't go to protests, or they don't know that they should care about being vegan. But if they read a good book, and everyone wants to read a good book, everyone wants to be told a good story, and so it's important in film and theater as well. But as you know, I'm a writer of fiction and a publisher. John's a playwright, and he's been doing some great work with his plays. But just being told a good story and learning something that you didn't know before and getting curious about that, I think is really important. And we've had, when you go to a restaurant and you see something on the menu that it's accidentally vegan, it's not, it just happens to be vegan and you get so excited about it. Then we get that way about books that are sort of like, accidentally pro-animal or accidentally vegan in a way that even the author may not have realized and then we work with it to kind of push that up to the forefront a little bit. You have to be really careful not to be preachy because readers definitely don't want that. But I think there's so much that people can learn from fiction and plays and nonfiction as well. But I think with nonfiction, it's tough to read tough stuff. It's tough to read about the cold, hard facts. And I think when you get absorbed in a story and you have an emotional connection to it, that can go so much farther. So that's what I definitely try to do when I write. And also when we look at submissions for Ashland Creek Press, what is a great story that also is going to draw in readers in a way where they learn something, maybe without even realizing it, but something that could potentially be life-changing for them.
What's some of the biggest challenges in maintaining that fiction with activism?
Well, the biggest challenge, of course, is to not sound like an activist writer. You have to create characters. Like with My Last Continent, my character is definitely, the character of Deb is definitely a little prickly. She has her opinions. She works in the tourist industry because it's the way she can get down to Antarctica, to the penguins that she studies, and she doesn't like all the tourists going there. She's a vegan, and she recognizes that she has to work with, people who are in the tourism industry. She doesn't believe there should be fish served on the ship. And then, her expedition leader says, well, you know what? Try to fill a ship without offering 5-star dining. That's not going to happen. You can't have it every way. So I think part of fiction is showing both points of view so that a reader doesn't feel preached to, so the reader has someone to identify with, but can also learn from the other point of view. So I think having characters that are diverse and that encompass the world as we know it, as well as introducing new ideas, is key. So and it's a tough balance to strike, especially when you're an opinionated writer, as I am. I had to really try hard not to be overbearing. So, and that's when having great editors helps a lot.
So as somebody who really only reads mostly nonfiction, what am I really missing out on? And where can I actually start exploring some great fiction that will kind of get me out of that rut?
Well, and I don't want to just plug our press because there's so many great books out there. But one thing that we do is we have a blog called Ecolit Books. It's ECOLIT BOOKS. And Ecolit Books is something we started as Ashland Creek Press, but that encompasses books from any publisher, any writer. We have a long list of contributing writers who do book reviews. So that's a good place to start. And we have categories, animal protection, environment, climate change, vegan. So you can look for fiction there. And also Ashland Creek Press. I mean, that's our goal. And there are a few publishers out there, but they are... And there's actually a publisher called Vegan Publishers, which I believe publishes mostly nonfiction. So we're one of the few presses that actually are doing fiction because that's where our passion is, but it's also where I think you can make a big difference because a lot of people do, they get burned out on nonfiction because they don't, it's less palatable than a really good story. One of the things that we do that we really have had fun with and find that it's important, it can be tough reading, but also really inspiring, is we published an anthology called Among Animals, and we just published our second volume. And these are short stories that all have to do with animals and the human-animal connection in our world. And some of the stories are tough because we don't always treat animals very well as humans, but they're important stories because it forces us to take a look at how we treat animals and do we want to continue this way or do we want to do better? So I think it's a great collection, and we have been thrilled with the caliber of writers that we have found. And some are vegan and some are accidentally vegan. Some tell amazing stories, probably not even realizing that they've written an activist story. They've written such an important story. So it's a wonderful both volumes we're really proud of, and we feel like we've gotten some great work for these in terms of short fiction. And the other thing that we're really excited about is an anthology we're putting together for next year to publish in the summer of 2018 called Writing for Animals. And it's a collection of articles and essays by writers for writers, and it's about how to write about animals in a way that makes, I don't want to use the word humanizes necessarily, but in a way that puts them on equal footing and doesn't relegate them to being lesser beings, because that happens a lot in literature. And so it's a really interesting collection of, that looks at literature of the past and that also encourages literature of the future that is more progressive in terms of animal protection and animal rights.
So what are some of the things that you see in the animal rights movement right now that you kind of just wish would disappear, or tactics that you don't like, or anything like that?
Oh, goodness. That's a tough question. It's a good question. I think because I am so, I'm on the edge of both worlds. I have so many activist friends in my life, and then I have other people who look at me like, you're vegan, what does that mean? And so I think, and it's not a turnoff to me, but what I think can be a turnoff to some people is just some of the extreme things, just some of the extreme things that PETA does that make people roll their eyes, and they think, oh, that's so crazy, activists are so over the top, that kind of thing. And it doesn't bother me because I think it's important. I think there's a place for it, but I kind of see people react to that in a negative way. And so that's why I think that so many different types of activism are necessary. The sort of literary activism where you kind of, you absorb information without really realizing it. That is as important as the in-your-face activism that is equally important. I have so much admiration for the people who, and I've done this too on a local level, like sitting at a booth on the 4th of July with an animal rights group and, passing out stickers that say, I love animals. And then if people are engaged, you bring them in and you show them photos of things, like what animals go through on a factory farm. And no one wants to see that. And I think that's really tough. And yet it's so important. So that's the big question for me is how do I get people to see that and not turn away and refuse to think about it? And so as a writer, that's one of the things, and as publishers, too, that's one of the things that I'm always thinking about and we're always thinking about with the press, because it's not that I want to see less of it, but I can see that sometimes that everyone needs something, an individualized way to kind of come around and open their hearts and minds. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, totally. It reminds me of a tote that I absolutely love that Tofu magazine came out with. It said, yes, I'm vegan. No, I'm not a member of PETA.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I think, what is an example? One thing that I do, I'm the only vegan that I'm aware of who volunteers at the animal shelter on the day that I go in. There are a few other vegans who are there. There's not a single vegan on the board. And I've been trying to, go get their events to be vegan. For the first time, 2 years ago, they actually had a vegan option on the menu. It just drives me crazy that they are, feeding us animals to raise money for animals. So that's another thing I'm really passionate about. But one of the things that I do, my own little weekly literary activism, is I bake things or I buy things and I bring them in, and it's vegan donuts, vegan cupcakes, vegan cookies. It's always delicious. People are amazed that it's vegan. I tell them, this is vegan too, try this. And it's just one of those little things that, and there was one woman there who actually, she's like, is it vegan? Because I'm not going to eat it if it's vegan. I'm like, try the cupcake. I promise you it is delicious. So it's one of those things that I don't know how it happens, but people have this automatic response to that word or that idea that this food can't be delicious. So one thing I do on a weekly basis is just feed people really good stuff and let them know that, and it's so easy to cook, and also share recipes because it's so wonderful. And a couple other friends of mine locally, they do the same thing. They'll go to a party, even if they're the only vegan, they'll bring something absolutely scrumptious, and it helps open people's minds to that. And then maybe they care more about health than animals, and you say it has no cholesterol in it, this is how healthy it is, that kind of thing. So I think it's really important to have those quote unquote normal everyday non-PETA vegans out there just living their lives, and you realize it's such a normal thing thing to do. It's really, these days especially, it's so easy to live this cruelty-free lifestyle and to eat really well. And it doesn't have to be an extreme thing. So I think that's important to try to teach people.
No, I love that idea of, just being out there and showing how normal it really is to be vegan and to really care, right? It's not an extreme. And I have a similar example where I have to bring in treats all the time to my normal job. And just this last year, somebody else has become vegan because they realize how easy it actually can be, right? And it's those little things that really do make a big difference.
It's so true. And I love that. And I remember one time there was a gathering for a bunch of the volunteers at the shelter, and they made the whole party vegan because of me, basically. I would think I was the only vegan there, and there were like 15 people, but they actually did it all vegan just because they were so kind and they wanted to make sure I could eat anything. But everyone was amazed at how good the food was. And so it was I thought that was wonderful and so successful. And, again, the more we can do that, the better that is. And congratulations. I mean, for having someone become vegan because of what you did, it's just, it's a beautiful thing.
So to take it back to books again a little bit, if somebody's like interested in starting the process of writing a book, would you have any advice for that?
Oh, definitely. So I think there's a couple things. The usual advice is just to read everything you can, to sort of write is in your natural voice as much as you can. Be who you are on the page. I've done a lot of writing workshops, a lot of teaching in my writing life, and a lot of times people say, like, I just don't know how to begin. And the simple thing is just start writing. Don't worry about, you'll find your voice in a natural way. It's hard if you try to write in a different voice. So I always tell people, write exactly the way you're talking to me right now. So there's advice for writing, joining a workshop, taking classes, finding a writing group, sharing your work, writing as much often as you can. But then in terms of literary activism, there's definitely a lot. There's not a lot out there about activist writing, but the one thing that's amazing to see is and we've noticed this a lot, and Among Animals has been adopted in a lot of university classrooms, either as part of an animal studies program in which they're teaching some fiction, or in a writing program in which they're doing an animal studies focus. So that's really been exciting to see that combination. So I think we're going to be seeing more anthologies about writing for animals, about, vegan writing, vegan literature, either how to write it or people who are critiquing it and assessing it and looking into it. So there are books out there on that. So read all you can about that and see what's out there. But I think reading really, if you don't have a writing background, reading as much as you can is the best training there is. When you think about it, there's so many MFA programs now, there's so many educational opportunities, but the great writers, in history never took a class. They just wrote, and they wrote from their heart, and they wrote what they wanted to see in the world. And I think if you are a vegan and you have an animal rights perspective, we definitely need to see more writers like that out in the world. So I would just encourage people to get going and start writing, and to also educate yourself in the publishing aspect of it, because it's very, very hard to get your work out into the world. There are so many books being published per year. Traditional publishing is harder and harder to break into, but there are also great options. There are small presses, there's self-publishing. So educating yourself about how to get published and thinking about how you want to get published is a great thing to sort of have in the back of your mind as well.
So this is a total selfless question here, a selfish question, I should say, for myself. Yesterday, my daughter got back from the library. She's 10 years old. And she came up to me super excited and said, I got my first YA book, right?
Oh,
so she's really excited about that. So just for me, what kind of books could I recommend for her in that YA category that would kind of focus around, normalizing veganism and normalizing activism and normalizing these behaviors that we've tried to instill in her whole life?
Oh gosh, that's such a great question. I think that, Ashland Creek Press, and I'll send you links to a few of these books, and we'll send you these books because the first things that we published was a YA series. we call it the Lithia trilogy, that it's written by a local author set around Southern Oregon, and it's about a young woman, a character who happens to be vegan. And this was, this is the early days of our press. It was about 2011 or 2012. And this was back when vampire stuff was big. Mm-hmm. So this is funny. This series, we loved it because it's about vegan vampires. So these vampires, so it's basically about a girl who has a troubled life. She is starting her life over again. She meets a mysterious guy in this small, weird little town. He turns out to be a vampire. She meets another man who's also a vampire, but he's a green vampire. So he has this symbiotic relationship with trees. He sucks the sap out of trees. And that's how he survives. Whereas the other guy is a traditional vampire who, takes the blood of humans. And so it's kind of like this battle between, the traditional vampires and the green vampires and this woman who gets, caught up, and it's a very environmental story. But that I think she might enjoy a lot. And it's clean enough for a young reader. And we have another great YA book at Ashland Creek Press called Strays. And this is a book that's about a young girl who has anger management issues. She's in high school. She writes something in her notebook that her teacher finds that everyone finds alarming. So she's sentenced to community service, and she has a fear of dogs, and she gets, quote unquote, stuck doing this dog rehabilitation program, which terrifies her. But she, learns to bond with a pit bull that has had sort of a similar troubling past. And so that's a really fun book. And she also kind of sees, this character makes the connection between loving animals and eating them, and becomes vegetarian at the end of the book. And so that's kind of a fun story. So in terms of other YA books, there are a couple of things on Ecolit books that we've reviewed, that our readers have reviewed, maybe a little more for young readers, but it is tough to find that sort of thing out there. I can't really think of any others offhand, which is kind of why we are doing what we're doing, because we want to see so much more of it out there. And again, not in a sort of activist way, but a sort of inspiring, this is the way the world looks way, not that vampires are based on realism, but it's the idea that you can have this fantasy story with a character who happens to be vegan,
No, that actually seems right up her alley. One of the things when she was a little bit younger that she absolutely loved, there was this monster series for a while. I don't know the name of it.
Monster High?
Yes, where one of the characters was vegan and they were a vampire.
So, it's so cool.
Yeah. So they both sound right up her alley. So I'll definitely check those out.
Awesome.
So thank you so much for being on. How can people actually get a hold of your work, specifically, My Last Continent and everything else that you're working on at Ashland Creek Press?
Well, they can visit midgeraymond.com and find out about My Last Continent, and there are links for where to get it. There is also ashlandcreekpress.com. So we are all over those two websites for more information. The other thing I want to mention for anyone who is a writer who's listening, we do an annual prize for environmental literature, and we call it New Environmental Literature because it's all about, giving back to the planet rather than taking from the planet. And I know your listeners will be on board with this, but we always have to explain it because so many books that are supposedly about nature, about hunting and fishing and all these kinds of things that are about taking from the planet instead of protecting it. So our prize that's why we call it New Environmental Literature. And we just opened for submissions, and we have an amazing judge this year, Jonathan Balcombe, who's the author of several books, most recently the best-selling book, What a Fish Knows. And if you haven't read that yet, it's so, so good. It's a beautiful, amazing book about how incredible fishes are. And he's vegan. He's going to be the final judge of this contest, which is open until December. So that's open to all writers, whether you have we consider published books and unpublished manuscripts. And that goes till the end of the year. And it includes a $1,000 prize and a writing residency at this beautiful organization called Playa in Eastern Oregon. So there's that for all the writers out there. And yeah, I would love for people to come visit us online and to be in touch.
Which Side Podcast is hosted and produced by Jordan Halliday and Jeremy Parkin of the Which Side Media Collective. with web design by Jordan Halliday and sound design by Jeremy Parkin. Booking by Mari Halliday. Go to wishsidecollective.org to check out the other shows in the collective. As always,
hi, this is Midge. It was great talking to you, Jeremy and Jordan. Thanks so much for the wonderful chat, and fuck shit damn.